As a modern-day manager, you might be trying to understand why your newest team members seem so different from everyone else. They're glued to their phones, they ghost meetings when they're not feeling it, and they question everything you say. Yet somehow, they're also bursting with creative ideas and solving problems in ways you never imagined. Welcome to the reality of working with Generation Z. If you're leading a team, hiring young talent, or simply trying to bridge the generational gap at work, you've probably felt some tension firsthand. Gen Z isn't just another group of young employees who will eventually get it. They're fundamentally shaped by forces previous generations never experienced. Growing up with smartphones in hand, living through a pandemic during their formative years, and navigating a world where information overload is the norm. The clash between older leadership styles and Gen Z expectations isn't going away, but it doesn't have to be a problem. By understanding where these young workers come from, you can transform frustration into opportunity. Today, you'll get to know Gen Z, what they value, how they think, what they want. You'll also see how to dispel common myths that make us dismiss their potential, learn practical strategies for keeping them engaged and mentally healthy, and even future-proof them in an increasingly AI-driven world. In The Tale of Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, the eternally youthful protagonist captivates us with his magic and whimsy, yet causes chaos precisely because he refuses to grow up. His lack of maturity, however charming, creates real problems. Today's business leaders are facing a strikingly similar paradox with Gen Z workers. These young employees arrive brimming with potential for innovation and fresh perspectives, yet they often lack the social and emotional maturity needed to navigate workplace challenges effectively. This creates friction that's hard to ignore, so much so that many managers are simply avoiding Gen Z candidates altogether. In a 2024 survey by ResumeBuilder.com, 3 out of 10 managers reported they were doing just that. But here's the catch. These managers are missing out on the very innovation and creative thinking Gen Z workers can bring. So what's behind the puzzling contradiction that is Gen Z? The answer lies in a unique developmental mismatch. Gen Z grew up overexposed to information through the vast online world, encountering complex and sometimes disturbing content long before they were ready to process it. At the same time, they were underexposed to first-hand experiences, those real-world situations where you learn to handle challenges, setbacks, and face-to-face interactions. Their formative years unfolded against a backdrop that previous generations never experienced: instant access to unlimited information, normalized threats from terrorism to school shootings, the rise of cancel culture, expectations for entertainment available on demand at every moment, and unprecedented levels of multiculturalism. These forces shaped a generation whose characteristics form the acronym COPING. They're cynical, having watched leaders flounder during the COVID-19 pandemic, eroding their trust in authority. They're overwhelmed by the relentless flood of information competing for attention across every screen. They're pragmatic, learning from millennials' mistakes with debt and approaching career decisions with calculated caution. They're also inclusive, deeply committed to social equality and environmental justice. They're nuanced, resisting pigeonholing. Their identities and preferences remain fluid rather than fixed. And finally, they're globally savvy, quite possibly the most well-informed generation in history, with a heightened sense of agency about world events. Every generation brings something unique, shaped by its times. Gen Z may seem challenging, but understanding their developmental context reveals they have plenty to offer. The human brain loves taking shortcuts. When we encounter something new or unfamiliar, we quickly file it away into neat categories without really examining the full picture. And right now, this mental habit is creating a serious blind spot when it comes to Gen Z workers. Older generations have constructed an elaborate set of myths about these young employees. 6 specific misconceptions that prevent us from seeing who they actually are. Let's unpack those misconceptions. First, there's the belief that Gen Zers don't listen because they simply don't care. Now, let's be honest, this is probably true for some of them. But for many others, that's not the case. They care deeply, just about different things. Their values around work have shifted, and what we're witnessing isn't apathy, but a fundamental reorientation of priorities. Second, we call them entitled and lazy, assuming they've never faced real hardship. Yet every generation has been labeled entitled by the one before it. Gen Z just happens to be the newest in line. They disengage from traditional workplace cultures not out of laziness, but because they recognize these structures are becoming increasingly obsolete. The third mistake we make about Gen Z is to blame their distrust of authority on fake news consumption. The truth is, you don't need misinformation to notice when authority figures fail to practice what they preach. Gen Z has witnessed plenty of that firsthand. Our fourth myth about Gen Z is that they are fragile, and this is all down to social media. While screens play a role, we're ignoring our own contribution. Older generations created a culture focused on protecting young people rather than preparing them for challenges. Fifth, there's the myth that they won't do grunt work and lack loyalty. The reality? They'll demonstrate tremendous loyalty when it's reciprocated. Build meaningful connections, invest in their development, and watch them go the extra mile. Finally, our sixth myth is that they simply don't want to work. Ever had a Gen Z employee clock out at 5 p.m. exactly on the dot every day? They might be rushing off to a side gig to help them pay their rent. What these workers actually want is fair compensation and reasonable working conditions, hardly an unreasonable demand. When we move past these myths and actually get to know Gen Z workers, something remarkable emerges. Consider this. Research from Zen Business found that 75% of Gen Zers intend to become full-time entrepreneurs. That's an extraordinary level of ambition and initiative. These new workers possess a heightened sense of agency compared to previous generations, acting as natural problem solvers who dive directly into challenges. When they spot an issue, they immediately start hacking toward solutions. And their commitment to helping underrepresented groups and creating meaningful social change, it's unparalleled. That's considerable firepower waiting to be unleashed. The question for leaders isn't whether Gen Z has value, it's whether you're willing to create conditions where that value can flourish. Surely one of the wonders of the modern age is Wikipedia. It's this fascinating digital experiment where knowledge gets built by everyone and no one at the same time. There's no single gatekeeper, no central authority dictating what stays and what goes. It's fluid, constantly evolving, hopefully improving with each edit. And here's the thing. This is the world Gen Z grew up in. So when you're trying to figure out how to keep Gen Z employees engaged and motivated, which, let's be honest, keeps many business leaders up at night, think about Wikipedia. It's a blueprint for how things should work. Leading Gen Z means you can't rely solely on your job title. You need to lead by permission, not just position. They need a genuine say in business processes, and you need to connect with them emotionally, not just transactionally. Here's a practical framework that actually works. The 3-step planning approach. It starts with napkin conversations, those early brainstorming sessions where everything's still loose and anyone can contribute ideas. Nothing's carved in stone yet. Leaders then privately force rank the options that have emerged. Next come whiteboard conversations. Now there's a direction, but key influencers can still suggest changes, though not fundamental ones. The train's moving, but the route isn't completely locked. Finally, you reach slide deck conversations. The presentation is basically ready, and people can propose minor tweaks or cosmetic improvements, though not everyone gets a vote on which suggestions make the cut. Why does this work so beautifully with Gen Z? Because people support what they help create. They feel engaged throughout the process, even though team leaders maintain final authority. It's collaborative without turning into chaos. But sadly, this alone won't retain them forever. For Gen Z, career growth doesn't follow a ladder. It's more like hopping across lily pads. So what else can you do? Consider creating an internal gig economy. Offer cross-departmental training and encourage movement every few months. Set up entrepreneurial zones where employees form teams to tackle specific challenges. Give them real flexibility and autonomy. Remote work options, compressed 4-day weeks. The pandemic permanently shifted workplace expectations, and acknowledging this reality means acknowledging Gen Z. And perhaps most importantly, practice listening with humility. There's a powerful principle here. Speak as if you think you're right, but listen as if you think you're wrong. When younger employees feel genuinely valued and heard, engagement follows naturally. According to McKinsey research, more than half of Gen Z reports having been diagnosed with or received treatment for a mental health condition. That's higher than any previous generation. As an employer, you're walking a tightrope. Many Gen Z employees simply won't show up if they're not feeling their best that day. So how do you meet them where they are while still running a successful business? Start by understanding their story. Picture being 12 years old and already deep into social media. That's Gen Z's reality. They developed an intense fear of missing out, FOMO, alongside an equally powerful fear of messing up, FOMU. Every post, every like, every comment became a potential source of anxiety. Then came the pandemic during their formative teenage years. Quarantine, masks, a pervasive sense of fear and social avoidance. When you combine social media's constant pressure with pandemic isolation, it's hardly surprising that many Gen Zers struggle with anxiety, underdeveloped interpersonal skills, and diminished trust in authority figures. So what's your move as a leader? First, recognize what kind of conversation you're having. Sometimes discussions about mental health are purely informational, straightforward logistics about time off or accommodations, but often they're deeply emotional. When you're unsure, answer your young employee's question with a question. Watch their body language and tone carefully. If the conversation becomes emotional, stay truthful while leaving them hopeful about themselves. That balance matters enormously. And here's where things get interesting. You'll want to empathize, putting yourself in their shoes and genuinely feeling what they're feeling. But don't stop there. Empathy feels their pain. Compassion moves toward healing it. As a leader, you're not just acknowledging their struggle, you're equipping them to overcome it and grow stronger. On an organizational level, there's a practical framework you can use, and it involves 4 MIMIS. Encourage margin in their schedules, blocks of time dedicated to quiet and simplicity. Stress the importance of movement, literally getting out of the chair, walking outside, playing sports. Point them toward mindfulness practices that increase present moment awareness. And perhaps most crucially, discuss strategies for managing stress and anxiety, reducing social media hours, seeing a therapist, or considering medication when appropriate. By helping Gen Zers help themselves, you're not just being compassionate, you're building a stronger connection and ultimately, a more resilient team. Many Gen Z workers give off an impression of supreme confidence. Hand them a smartphone and watch them conjure answers to virtually any question in seconds. It's impressive wizardry, but scratch beneath that surface and you'll discover something surprising. That confidence is often a mirage. Gen Z haven't had opportunities to try things and fail in real workplace situations. As a result, they're missing crucial interpersonal abilities. Back in the 1960s, the U.S. Army coined the term soft skills for these capabilities, since they didn't rely on machinery. But let's call them what they really are, power skills, because these are what separate good employees from truly great ones. So how do you cultivate these skills in your Gen Z team members? There's actually a clear pathway. Start with conversation. Introduce a power skill through discussion. Images often help catalyze understanding. Next comes demonstration. Gen Zers need to witness the skill in action, whether through a mentor modeling it or observing someone who embodies it naturally. Then you move to application. They need a safe environment to practice, maybe through role-play scenarios or experiments with teammates. But here's the critical part. Application sometimes produces messy experiences. That's why evaluation must follow. You assess their practice, helping them extract lessons from both successes and stumbles. Now, there's a common concern among Gen Zers. What if the skills they're developing today become obsolete as AI advances? It's a legitimate worry as artificial intelligence increasingly handles tasks once reserved for humans. But certain power skills are actually becoming more valuable, not less, for leaders today and the leaders of tomorrow. Consider authenticity and transparency. AI systems are built on human biases and can't deliver that genuine human connection we all crave. Developing these qualities makes you irreplaceable. More broadly, emotional intelligence is becoming essential. People who can read a room, manage emotions during interpersonal interactions, and maintain self-awareness, they create connected, trusting, resilient teams. While AI excels at answering specific questions, how do I become a better listener? Or how should I approach this budget problem? But someone still needs to identify growth opportunities in the first place. Someone has to observe their team and recognize developmental potential. And adaptability. That's increasingly critical as AI evolves into new territories, reshaping work in ways we can barely imagine. If you can develop these skills yourself and foster them across your entire team, young and old alike, you'll be positioned to handle whatever challenges emerge in this rapidly shifting landscape.